what's up, Boxers? Trey here. So if you haven't seen it, we just released a new manual. This is something I've been working on for a long time. It's called the Published Game Design Manual. This is all about game design. It's not about marketing. We've talked a lot about that, but this is about what publishers are going to want to see inside of your games. It's very in-depth. It's 25 pages, and it goes over all the various aspects and some things you probably wouldn't think about, like having characters be smaller in your game and having a lot of space in your game and giving your game room to breathe. All things that, after talking with all the big publishers out there, these are things that they are looking for. So I'm going to go over this manual now with you. If you want to download it, it's free. The link is in the description and you can check it out. Of course, if you like this kind of stuff and you want to learn more about game marketing and game design, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Like and subscribe. All right, guys, so looking at the manual here, again, it's called Published Game Design. Got to give a shout out to Igor. He did an amazing job on all the graphics for this. Someone's going to take these colors, this color palette, and make a game. And honestly, I don't blame you guys. It looks great. So we start off with a quick introduction. Now, the main point with this, guys, you don't have to read it, but here at the bottom, I want to make sure you do see this. We talk about the 5 most important parts of getting published, all right? And this part is important. And it's game design, graphic design, level design, and retention. Also, just one thing I do want to point out, we do actually have a game business. I think most of you guys know that, but for anyone who downloads this report, we want to make sure they knew that. Besides having a game development company, all this started from a game company that has over 60 million downloads. That's important because I want people to know that we do know what we're talking about here as well. All right, now when we get into the game design section, and this is one of the 4 main important parts, we're going over game design, we're going over graphic design, right? We're going to go over retention, all that stuff. This is one of the main important sections. And inside of this section, in all the sections, we're gonna have 4 subsections, all right? So this one again is game design. And I'll discuss a lot about what game design is in its most basic form. It's simply the rules of your game, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. And then you'll see down here in this section, we're going to focus on the most important aspects of game design. That's the game universe, difficulty growth, skill balancing, and your overall experience. So in short, guys, game design is that overall experience, okay? It's how everything works together, and it's about developing good rules, not just for gameplay, but for the actual design of your game. So let me explain what that means. We're gonna break this down further by going into the first part of game design, which is the game universe. Now, this was a concept that was first explained to me from our CTO, Nick Rodinko. And it's pretty cool. I'm gonna read it here. The game universe is more than the rules of your game. It's the universal laws of your game that you create when building a new world. For example, how heavy is the gravity in your world? How about the ground? Is it bouncy? What color are pipes in your game? And this is interesting. I use the pipes example because if you think about Super Mario Brothers, the pipes are always green. Maybe you'll find a pipe that wasn't green in later versions, but I'm talking about mainly the original Super Mario Brothers. And that's pretty amazing. That's a universal law. You always think about that, right? You see a pipe, you know it's gonna do one of 3 things when you're playing Super Mario Brothers. Either you're gonna be able to go in this pipe, you're not gonna be able to do anything with the pipe, or a specific enemy is going to come out of the pipe, which is going to be the plant. You're only gonna see one of those 3 options when you see the pipe. It's a universal law. And all of these laws work together to give you a real feeling of a living, breathing universe in your game. Now, this is not only with complex games. This can be the same with simple games. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the document. Next up, we talk about difficulty growth, another really important part of game design. This is your game growing more difficult over time. It seems simple, but a lot of new developers, they don't do this. If you look at our games like The Lion's Inn or Endless Sky made by Nick, these games get harder over time. And with Buildbox, we actually have the game show hard levels, or what we call scenes, later on as you're playing the game longer. That way, when you're more experienced, you have high level content that you're not gonna see if you're not good at the game. You're only gonna see it if you can play for a long time because your skill levels increase. You wanna have your games grow more difficult based on skill level. But I go a little bit deeper than that. That might sound obvious, and even though we see a lot of people not do that, but I go deeper in this second section talking about the 2 different ways of doing this. All right, so the ways to increase difficulty in your game are either going to be make the environment stronger or make both the character stronger and the environment. Here's what I mean. If you make the environment stronger, I really mean more difficult. So in The Lion's Inn, the first levels that you go through are gonna be simple. By the end of the game, it's gonna be pretty difficult. All right, and a lot of games have done this. Even Pac-Man, the first level is going to be easy, then the subsequent levels later on are going to be harder. But now we're seeing a lot of even simple mobile games take role-playing formats and aspects and put them into their game. And what role-playing does different is it not only strengthens the enemies and the environment and makes it harder, it also strengthens the character. Now in simple games like The Lion's Den, the character never changes. But we're even seeing in simple games like Balls, published by Ketchup, where later on the environment gets tougher because all of these blocks have higher health, they're harder to kill, but your character gets stronger because it has more bullets. And this balancing act of increasing character strength to fight the environment is getting more and more popular, even in the most simple games you can imagine. A great example of this is Fidget Spinner, published by Ketchup. This is the most simple rudimentary game ever, but it actually has a lot of depth with the RPG elements. You can level up various aspects, various skills, if you will, of the character, and you must do that in order to get to the next level. So it actually adds a pretty cool RPG element, even if it's in its most simple form possible, to the game, and we're seeing more and more of that. Next up, we talk about difficulty growth's cousin, skill balancing. And skill balancing is really important because this is the rate of difficulty increasing in your games. Another one, when people add difficulty, which is rare we see with new developers, if they add difficulty growth, a lot of times they make it too hard too fast. Really, really common. All right, and you know what happens when you play a game? You become an expert at your game. So you're designing levels that are extremely hard because you're making it challenging and fun for you. You got to take you out of the equation when you're making games. You have to play test frequently on people who aren't as good as well. And then finally, the last part of game design I discussed in the document is overall experience. This is kind of like the game universe and all these elements on steroids together, because you got to constantly think about, how is this working? How is the UI working with the gameplay? You got to take a step back and look at the whole experience of your game. And a great way of doing this, and what we're going to talk about a lot in the next section, graphic design, is using references. Have a reference as a benchmark that you can focus on and say, okay, I really like this game, Monument Valley. Everything just works together. The user interface and the gameplay itself just works amazingly and gives a great overall experience. Why does my game not do that? It's hard to look at your game subjectively because you're so inside of it. You're working on it so long, but you've got to take a step back sometimes. Take 48, 72 hours. Don't play your game. Don't even think about your game, right? Veg out. Find the new TV series on Netflix and veg out and go crazy. Then when it's over, come back, dive into your game, and don't look at it as the developer. Look at it as a new player and really think about that overall experience and look at your reference and compare it. That's something we have to constantly, consistently do. And of course, testing on new people helps with that as well. All right, so next up, we get to section 2. This is about graphic design. Obviously, super important. Doesn't matter how great your game is. If the design's ugly, no publisher is going to publish it. Your game's not going to get featured. Design is equally important to how good your game is and how great it plays. Now, in this section, we're going to focus on 4 key areas, as you can see here: consistency, object sizes, evolution, and user interface. What does it mean? Let's start with consistency. So just like universal laws that we previously discussed in the game design section, your game's graphics should be consistent throughout. All right, you want to use the same artist or artists that are really amazing and know how to work through styles together. All right, you don't want to use a pixelated character and then a minimal background and then a fully illustrated object in your game. But not only that's obvious, right? Not only that, you also want your styles to flow from UI all the way down to the actual game graphics itself. We see a lot of people have issues with this. So this is good. I mean, you want your platforms, you should be similar, right? And this is the example I use here in this little drawing I made. The platforms are all kind of similar. And even if I used different color platforms later on, they would have a similar pixel style. And I made this in about 5 minutes. And a great example of this is Minecraft. It's very consistent in graphics, right? All the voxels have pixels. They're all unique, right? They have to be unique or you get confused playing the game, but it's consistent and it flows together. One of the biggest issues I see is when people start making their own art, it's not consistent. The pieces don't all work magically together. There's different palettes in there. Or if it's just one palette, maybe it's too simplistic. And listen, this is the hard part. this is when you got to look at references, 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 references. If you're not good enough yet as a graphic designer, and it's okay, right? It took all of us a very long time to get to the point where we can make graphic design. I'm still struggling there, okay? But I try. But if you're not amazing at it, then you got to use references. And even if I'm making a game like Wall Switch or The Lines In or whatever, Phases, I'm using tons of references and constantly checking and tweaking the design until it's perfect, all right? But consistency, big key there. All right, next up, another big complaint I have after seeing so many people's games over the last few years, and that's a really amazing opportunity that we've had at Buildbox. We're constantly looking at people's games, and it really lets me see where people are struggling a lot, and it's object sizes. It's a real obvious one, but it's actually kind of non-obvious at the same time. All right, a lot of times people are playing a game and they're confused. They don't know why their game's not fun, but the problem is, you have an iPhone that's this big and their character's taking up that much space, and there's not enough room to be able to move around and do much in. You're dying a lot, and there's not a lot of opportunity for level design. The object sizes are just simply too big. I don't know if I've ever seen a game where someone showed me and I said, you know what, man, your character's just too small. I don't know if that has ever happened. So you definitely want to focus on that. You want to make your object sizes most likely bigger, but if you want to know how big they should be, then just compare it. Download an image from a game that you like, slap it in Photoshop on top of yours, and see how big your character is compared to that one. All right, so then next up in the graphic design section, we have evolution. And this is interesting because I've made this mistake on multiple occasions. When I talk about evolution, what I mean is watching trends in the App Store, because they do evolve, especially in graphic design, more than probably anything, all right? So what you want to do is make sure you're creating a graphical style that is popular now, and hopefully 6 months from now, when your game is completely done, polished, and ready to go, and not something that was popular 6 months before now. Had this problem happen a lot with our Publisher Elite customers, where they were a little bit behind the ball and they made a game, they're ready to pitch it, and it's a great looking game, but it's something that people were signing more 6 months ago. This is true with gameplay, it's true with game design as a whole, the whole overall experience, but you primarily see this with graphics. Your graphics definitely want to be up to date. For example, right now at the time of me shooting this video, if you go to the top of the App Store and you look at the games, almost all of them have a dark background. I don't know why, right? I don't think anyone decided that. If you would have looked in the App Store 2 years ago before Color Switch came out, none of them had a dark background. This is something I talked about a lot on the Buildbox forums and in videos, etc. And it was something that was very noticeable. You make a black background in a game 2 years ago, it would not get signed. Now, every single one of the top games, besides Flappy Dunk, I think, have a black background. So these types of design elements you need to think about, and you need to watch it closely, because guess what? That's not going to last forever. So if you go and work on a game with a black background, you could miss the boat on that. How do you know? You got to look and see what's rising. It's a constant ebb and flow, a constant rising and falling of these themes, and you keep a finger on the pulse. You're talking to other people, you're working with developers, and you're really thinking about this stuff. Most people don't think about this stuff, but it's really important. All right, so evolution, definitely make sure to focus on that. All right, the last part of graphic design, and definitely not the least most important of the bunch, is user interface. I'll go into detail here about some of the problems I've noticed with people, and I'll go ahead and tell you one now that's really, really important, and that is having consistency with your user interface. One of the biggest mistakes I see is people will have random buttons, different colors for no reason. I don't really get that, but they'll have like the restart button be green, but the start button's going to be purple, and then they'll have a social sharing button's going to be blue or something, and then it'll be different on another screen. It needs to all be the same, and even more than that, if you have a shop button on multiple screens, it needs to always be the same color. If you have a restart and a start, all right, those are the same action. You want to associate different colors in the mind of your players with an action. Then another huge one on UI is less is more. That means in object sizes, where you don't want to have really big characters, it's the same here. I've seen people with social sharing buttons that are this big taking up the whole screen. You don't want to do that. Less is truly more. Focus on getting rid of as much as you can. And again, reference, reference, reference. If you see the top games in the App Store, they rarely have cluttered UIs. I don't think you'll ever find one that's a super cluttered UI. Some games, like I think Stack is one of these games, have no real UI. There's no game over screen. Well, they have a UI technically, but they don't have like game over screens, like full UI menus that most other games have. It's really interesting. Check that out. Make sure to look at references, because typically people way overcomplicate the UI and they lack a lot of consistency with colors and the whole thought process behind their UI. All right, so now we're halfway through the document and we're going to be looking at level design. And this is really cool, all right? I love designing levels. And the really exciting thing about level design, and we're going to talk about, is it's a great place to innovate. But I've broken this down into 4 sections, which is uniqueness, difficulty, space, and inspiration. And let's go ahead and start with uniqueness. And again, you want to innovate here. This is one place you don't want to model things too closely. All right, you want to get inspiration, that's fine, but you want to create something unique. If you can do something unique in your level design that hasn't been done before, and I'll give you a small, very simple example. When we made the lines in, Nick came up with this idea of spikes going out the sides. Look, maybe I can do it on this video. Ready? Wait, no, I gotta get here. It would be like, shing. Look at that. See? It'd be like, shing, 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 coming out the sides. That was very professional. And no one had done that in a minimal setting the way he did it. It was like one after another. Probably not going to get that one on video, but you get the point. Going up, you play the game. And it was really cool. It was a really cool level design effect. It only happened when you got a pretty high score in the game. You were really getting far along in the game. And it gave a really fun surprise factor. We'll talk about surprise and wonder in a minute. But that was a unique level design element. We always try to do this. We do not look at anything else specifically. We don't reference when we make level design. Some people do. It's our process. I'm not telling you you should not look at references when doing level design. We personally don't. Instead, we're constantly playing video games. We play Xbox, we play Nintendo Switch, we play all the big mobile games as they're coming out. We download all the big games from all the big publishers every single week. So we're constantly getting inspiration. But when we design levels, we don't try to copy anything too close. We try to really be unique. And I think it's important to publishers. And that's the whole goal here. All right, so next up we have difficulty thresholds. Now, this is pretty interesting. We've already talked about games starting off too difficult. This goes into detail on that from the level design perspective. A lot of people, again, they get to be so good at their games, they get to be an expert at their game, so they make it too difficult for users to be able to play in the beginning. You want the very first part of your game, the first few seconds, to be super easy, and that threshold increases and the game gets more difficult with your level design. But if you have an endless game especially, you don't want anyone dying in the first 4 seconds. Give them a little breathing room there. And speaking of breathing room, one of my favorite parts of this is space. It goes right in with character size. That is another level design issue that we see a lot, and that's the space being too confined in the game. You want the game to feel open. You want people to feel like they can breathe in your game. You don't want them to ever die because they felt like it was confined. And me and Nick have a term for this. He sent me a game one time and it was really good, but it was so hard. I told him I felt like I was doing surgery playing this game. It was so intricate. I felt like if I was just off a hair, I was like nervous playing this game. And that's because the space was not there. It was too confined. If you look at really popular games, you know, from Color Switch to Zigzag and these types of games, there is more space in the game, all right? You have a little bit of room to move around. All right, Zigzag, probably one of the most combined ones. Not the best example. You can look at many other catch-up games, though, and see that. Balls, for example, right? So space is really important when you're designing your levels. And finally, inspiration, okay? And I've talked about model and improve a lot with you guys, and I think you already kind of know how this works. And like I told you, we try not to copy. Aim to make your version of the game very different. Get inspired by stuff instead of modeling too tightly. All right, so now the final section, we're going to talk about retention. Now, if you're not sure about retention, it's really simple. Retention is how long someone stays in your game when they're playing it and how often they come back. You want to retain users. It's huge for publishers. It's one of the things they focus on the most because it directly relates to revenue. All right, the longer someone's playing your game, if they're serving ads in that game, then the longer they're going to see ads, the more they're going to see ads, the more they're going to click, the more money that you're going to generate. So retention is super important. We break this down again into 4 different sections. The first one being wonder, and wonder is simply wondering what's coming next in the game. All right, and I go into a little bit more detail than that, but that's really what it is. You want to provide exciting things so they go, I wonder what's going to happen next. The example I use here is in Super Mario Brothers 3. It was the first time you would collect outfits to change Mario. All right, and once you get the first one, which I think was like the raccoon or something like that, I can't remember. Once you get the first one, you're constantly curious, what's going to come next. What are the next ones going to be? There was no internet back there, right? So you're really wondering, you're going through the manual trying to find this stuff. So wonder is really great. Now, wonder has a brother, and his name is surprise. Now, you can have surprise without wonder, all right? You can surprise someone because they do something. They weren't wondering if it was going to happen, but they were just surprised. They didn't know flour was going to come out of the pipe, all right? Or whatever you choose to do. But at the same time, surprise can be a byproduct of wonder, right? They're wondering, and boom, they get hit with surprises. And wonder and surprise are so important because they add emotional value to your game. It's why people get emotionally attached to games. It's a really big reason. That and getting involved into the character of the game. But that's for another discussion. Especially with the mobile games, right? A lot of these are minimal, so we don't have as much character involvement where you really want Link to succeed or that type of thing. But we do have a lot of wonder and surprise, all right? So we have seen that really helps with retention. All right, so then annoyance. This is a bit of an interesting one. I was talking to someone recently and I said something about a game being annoying. And they were like, hey, why would you say that? It was a game we'd worked on. And I said, no, you're misunderstanding me. I think that can be a really good thing. If you have the perfect amount of annoyance, then it can make you want to come back and play it. If you remember back in the day, they used to call Nintendo games Nintendo hard back in like the 90s, right? In the late 80s, because they were so hard, it made you want to just come back and beat it. And that started to come back with games like Super Meat Boy and the Impossible Game, Geometry Dash. We're seeing a lot of these really hard games coming back. And there's a reason for that, right? You feel so good when you finally beat a really hard game. So annoying the user is not always bad, but you got to be so careful. This is such a balancing act. Right? It's very, very simple to annoy them to the point of not playing your game. But a minor bit, right? Annoying them just enough to make them really proud of their accomplishments can help with retention. And then finally, competitiveness, right? This is huge. We do this in a lot with our endless games where Lines In or Endless Sky, Blue Edge, where people are trying to get a high score and they're trying to beat their friends. Great example is Flappy Bird. When you played Flappy Bird, if you played it during its heyday when it was going nuts, if you told a friend about that game, you probably told them your score with it. And they had a really simple score. It'd be like, hey, I got 52 or something. That would be great, right? It wasn't like it was, I got 1,472,368. It was a pretty small number, easy to remember. And then you would share that, and it really made it grow virally because of its competitiveness. That's a really big one too. All right, so at the end here, we have a cheat sheet. This is at the end of the document. With game design, you want to focus on game universe, difficulty growth, skill balancing, overall experience. With graphic design, consistency, object sizes, evolution in the user interface. With level design, uniqueness, difficulty, space, inspiration, and then with retention, wonder, surprise, annoyance, and competitiveness. Guys, if you nail all of this stuff in your game that you're pitching to a publisher and you really nail 10 out of 10 every one of those aspects, you will crush it. Trey Smith, I hope you enjoyed it. Download this for free if you want. The link is in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe. We'll talk to you later.
Like and subscribe.